Climate First Bank was then launched on June 1st, 2021 with a mission to do the right thing for our planet, our people, our community, and our shareholders. Ken has been a long fan of Von Schnard and Vincent Stanley's work, and Climate First Bank has a foundation of inspiration from them both. Thank you, Ken, for joining us today. Will you please introduce our special guest?
Thank you, Lauren. And Lauren didn't say that she and I have known each other for a long, long time. She came to work at First Green Bank right out of college or shortly out of college, and then went to work for our good friends Kat Taylor and Tom Steyer at Beneficial State Bank in California, and has come back home. So we're just delighted to have Lauren back with us. Hi, Vincent. It's great to have you.
Thank you for having me here.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Cindy and I met Vincent over a decade ago. Vincent published his book, The Responsible Company, and I got a copy of it. A little bit of the backstory. After we sold our first bank, Florida Choice, Cindy and I also went on a cross-country trip, and my brother gave me the book, Let My People Go Surfing, which is Yvonne Chenard's autobiography. And that was the inspiration for First Green Bank. And so, of course, that's been the foundational inspiration for everything I've done since then. But then Vincent published his book, The Responsible Company. I started reading it and I went, oh my God, this is the owner's manual for a responsible company. And so I just picked up the phone and called Patagonia, and Vincent called me back, and I think I'll let Vincent describe if he felt the same way. We just instantly hit it off. And then shortly after that, we made a trip to California seeking medical care for Cindy, and he invited us to the Patagonia headquarters, and we had the most delightful day that I think I've had in pretty much in my whole life. Spending time with the management team at Patagonia. They invited us to an employee, their quarterly, I guess, or monthly employee meeting, which was incredible. Swore us to secrecy since the financials and stuff were confidential. But we're really stoked to have you here, Vincent. And Vincent is like I said, the author of The Responsible Company. He's been with Patagonia pretty much on and off since the beginning in 1973. And many of those years was in key executive roles, like head of sales and marketing. But Vincent is Patagonia's official storyteller. And he's an amazing storyteller. He's an amazing speaker. I've heard him speak a number of times. He helped develop the Footprint Chronicles, the company's interactive website that outlines the social and environmental impact of its products, the Common Threads Partnership, and Patagonia Books. He's currently the director of philosophy for Patagonia, and he's a visiting fellow at the Yale School of Management. He's also a poet, and whose work has appeared in Best American Poetry, and he and his wife, writer Nora Gallagher, live in Santa Barbara. So with that, Vincent, did you have anything you wanted to add? And if not, we'll just get into the meat.
Well, thank you for that. I think one thing you didn't mention is that at the time you first called me, I had never in my life had a banker call me. You know, I was used to chasing bankers down. And so they told me there's a banker in Florida that wants to get a hold of you about, I said, I've got to take this call. So I called you right back. That was the start of our friendship. So.
That's funny. So I figured we couldn't have an actual fireside chat without having a fireplace going in the background. So even though it's starting to ease up over 70 degrees here in the mountains of North Carolina, I'll leave it on until I start sweating. Vincent, as we just said, I've always been a huge fan of Patagonia, and you and Yvonne are my heroes. And as I said before, you guys are the inspiration of my values-based banks. You're setting a new bar with the news of the new corporate structure, basically giving the company away to a trust. Can you tell us a little bit about that new structure? It took me a minute to get my head wrapped around it and all that. So.
Yeah, well, it's brand new. It's never, this particular structure, I think, will be the first in the United States. There are a number of Scandinavian companies and quite big companies that are owned by NGOs, including Maersk, the big shipping line, and Carlsberg Brewery in Denmark. I remember talking to Ivo about 15 years ago. We were, talking about succession even then. And at that time, he wanted to give Patagonia to a foundation. It had never been his intention to leave the company to his kids. He didn't believe in that. And but the problem was, at that time, if you gave your stock to a foundation, that foundation had to divest itself of the stock within 20 years if it was too large a percentage of its assets. So that didn't work. And so then the next step was to become a B Corp, and as is Climate First Bank. And this was what especially attracted us to becoming a B Corp was when California created the Benefit Corporation, gave legal status to writing your values into your articles of incorporation and your business charter. And at that time, I think Ivo and Melinda also changed the succession plan to leave the business to their adult children as the best way of preserving the company. So fast forward about 10 years, and what you have is we're a B Corp, we're well set up, but we've started to hear about something called the Purpose Trust, which allows you to create the ownership inside a trust that can never be sold. It can be dissolved, but it can never be sold. And the way we structured it is that there are two organizations. One is the Purpose Trust, which controls 100% of the voting stock of the company, but only 2% of the assets. 98% of the assets go into the Holdfast Collective, the 501c4, which will donate money to fight climate change and the environmental devastation that's facing us over the next decades, but also allows us to lobby and to pursue policy interests. It's not entirely a charitable trust. I think this has been so good for the company in three ways. One, it's good for the families because ultimately Fletcher and Claire, the adult kids of the Chenards, they both work at the company, but they like their parents. They've never been managers, and they didn't want to be billionaires. The company's now, the stock was valued at $3 billion. Well, you don't need $3 billion to support 4 families. And I've watched over the years the level of concern that, if you've got 3,600 employees in 24 different time zones, it's like being a country doctor in the 1920s. You are never very far from your responsibilities. So I think this was a good move for the family. It was a great move for the company. The alternatives to take it private or to sell it, I think, would have been enormously disruptive. And it's really good for the environment. It makes us, instead of giving $10 million a year away, we'll be able to give away about $100 million. And that puts us as one of the 5 leading environmental grant makers or donors. The other thing that I think is critical to stress is that we're not changing the business. We are a for-profit business, kind of proud of that, as you are of yours. We are dedicated to making high quality products that are durable, long lasting. We are dedicated to continuing to oppose a kind of economy that's based on accelerated consumption of disposable goods. We continue to be a B Corp. So the business itself still has all of its essential business values. At the same time, we have a different owner. So my favorite anecdote about this is after the announcement, we made an internal announcement at an all company meeting. And a woman named Cheryl Endo, who's worked for the company forever in key roles, supportive roles for the heads of production, goes up to the CEO and she says, "Ryan, I'm not taking any of your guff anymore." She says, "I don't work for you. I work for that tree over there." So I think that's the other thing about this, is that it really aligns the structure and the mission of the company. Our purpose statement since 2018 has been, we're in business to save our home planet. And now I think both the structure and the mission are very neatly aligned. But I understand that you also have a steward ownership structure, or that you worked on this when you were putting the bank together. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
We did, and I did a ton of research and came to the same conclusions that you had just articulated, that it's not been done in the U.S. I talked to Kat Taylor at Beneficial State Bank, and through some of the trials and tribulations of their structure, and we looked into the steward ownership, and I just could not ever get to the place where I thought we could raise enough capital to charter a bank, and that's the big problem with. I was going to say, you guys have the benefit of starting from scratch and it being family owned the entire time. That was a long, multi-decade, many nights of no sleep. So I'm not diminishing that one bit, but having to raise, we initially subscribed for $17 million in capital. I would have loved to have been in a place where I could write a check for that, but certainly wasn't. So we ended up basically doing the traditional route of a kind of public-private placement, with friends and family, and chartered as a benefits corporation. Florida passed the benefits corporation law in 2014, and then they amended it to allow banks in 2016. So we are the first and only bank in Florida that is I call it a legal benefits corporation. Yeah. I know that's not the proper term, but and we are pending B Corp, and that provides a little bit of protection, but the bank can still be sold. I mean, it can be sold tomorrow, and if to realize the maximum shareholder value today, it would probably be as an enterprise sale. The whole thing selling. Yeah. So I kind of sat back and said, well, as a baby boomer, what would I want out of my investments? And I would want cash flow and liquidity. Well, how do you provide cash flow and liquidity without selling the bank? It's by paying dividends and going public. Well, going public's got its own set of risks and challenges that it could be sold. But as we progress, we want to build immense shareholder value. For one thing, almost all my shareholders are friends or have become friends or family, and I'm just proud to offer that to them, but also never ever sell and have it to where we're doing good in the world forever. It's a working process, that's for sure. I don't think I'll live long enough to be able to actually do my very own bank where I could capitalize it or ever have enough money to do that. But so that's kind of the experience we had. And then I was also going to speak to you talked about, your employee who said, well, I don't work for, told the CEO, I don't work for you anymore. I work for the tree. We had originally, when we were putting the bank together, I thought, well, how cool would it be to have a board seat for Mother Earth? And so I approached my attorney, and he's a pretty conservative business guy. He's done almost all the banks in Florida, super bright, CPA, JD, LLM. And I just knew when I broached the subject with him, he would say, are you crazy? There's no way we can do that. The regulators will never stand for it. And I asked him, and he just sat silent. And then he said, I bet you could do that. It'd be kind of like being an advocate for a child who didn't have legal standing. And so I said, well, let's do it. And he said, well, no reason not to. We haven't done it yet, but it's now, once again, Patagonia leads the way. With you guys giving the company away, I went to my board just a couple of days ago, and I said, we got to do this Mother Earth board seat. We got to do it now. And I got some responses back already, and they're excited about it.
Yeah, I think it's such a great idea. Over the past 10 years, some countries have introduced legal standing for rivers or for natural resources, saying these places can't speak for themselves, but they are absolutely critical, and they have the right to exist and to thrive. And I think that's going to be an important development over the next 10 or 15 years. And also, what we're doing now, so we're pioneers, but we've done this before, and the reason to be a pioneer is not to be a one-off, but to help make it possible for other companies to do a similar thing. So, 10 years from now, you'll be in a position to learn from our mistakes, and you may have investors who may be more enthusiastic about the idea of a purpose trust because they've seen it work in other places.
That's a really good point. And to the point of rivers and natural places being given legal standing, I can just hear the argument now. Well, why would you give legal standing to an inanimate thing or object or whatever? Because you think of a guardian ad litem would be the advocating for a child that doesn't have standing. Well, then it comes back to, define personhood or whatever. Yeah. And now with the laws of the change in the law in America with Citizens United, giving corporations legal standing, why not a river? And then who's to say a tree is not a sentient being, right? I mean, I've always advocated that plants are sentient beings, so they should have standing.
And they should simply. I mean, I think if you look at indigenous cultures for millennia, they may not have had the idea of the legal structure that would give plants and animals standing, but they certainly understood that they were a part of nature, and that their lives, their ability to thrive depended on the ability of the natural world to thrive. That's something we've just lost in the last 250 years, a little bit of hubris over our ability to make steam engines and rocket ships and atom bombs. But I think as the climate crisis accelerates, and as Florida and California are in the forefront in experiencing more extreme weather over the past few years, I think the necessity to come around will become clearer to more people.
Boy, I hope so. I really hope so, because we, as anybody that follows this stuff knows, we're really down to the 11th hour, and with the horrid political environment we have in America, and really kind of going on across the world. I mean, look at Italy's latest elections, and I don't know what happened in Brazil. Did they have their election yet? Did Baldessari?
Yeah, they have a runoff. Lulu won, but not enough to avoid a runoff. So I'm not sure when that happens.
Yeah, and how legitimate does that count too, right?
So, but I think one of the interesting things is that if you look all around the world, that polarization falls on an urban-rural divide, and has a lot to do with the way climate change has affected the lives of people who are not college educated and who have traditionally made a living as workers or off the land. So I think that polarization can be traced to some of what we're talking about.
I think it really, really is. And when Cindy and I did our last cross-country trip, it just, like halfway through the trip, I looked at Cindy driving down the road, and we were in absolute rural somewhere. And I said, there's a lot of rural out there in America. And I picked up my phone. It's like, no cell service, no internet. So there's no cell service, there's no internet. They're all food deserts. I mean, if you go in a grocery store in these places, there's no food in there. It's all packaged garbage. It's all poison, or what I call fraud food. And I said, look at all the Trump signs. It's just obvious what's happened.
The economy has been hollowed out, and there's no political party that has actually helped to heal that economy. But certain demagogues are appealing on the basis of saying we've got your back because for all the kinds of wrong reasons, and people are responding to that.
Absolutely. Lauren, at what point should we stop to ask questions? I forgot to ask, is a quarter till, or what would you like to see?
Yeah, we have a quarter till. We're going to take questions, so feel free to use the Q&A portion of the webinar to submit any questions in the meantime. But yeah, you have plenty of time.
Okay. Vincent, the other thing I wanted to talk about, which is kind of the topic of this whole webinar, was the next 50 years. And gosh, I don't know. I mean, to me, the whole concept of thinking about 50 years is really cool. And I don't personally know of any businesses that think out 50 years, or much less plan 50 years. But what does the next 50 years bring for Patagonia?
I think we're starting to see the outlines of it, and we can certainly see it for the next 10 or 15 years. One is looking at our own environmental impact. And if we look at emissions, for instance, 97% of our emissions are in the supply chain, in the fabrics, the materials, and in the supply chain that the mills and the factories have. So one of we use 4 major fibers. And so the critical thing for us is to get out of using oil as a basis for polyester and nylon. And we're pretty close to getting there in the next few seasons, to be able to use 100% recycled polyester and nylon, which will make use of some of the 6 billion plus tons of plastic waste that have been left on the planet since 1950, without drilling for new oil. The second thing that's really critical to us, and this goes back to what we were talking about in the rural environment, is to introduce regenerative organic agriculture for the cultivation of cotton and hemp. And we've got some experimental farms that we're dealing with, several hundred. And we think that will take a while, but the benefits will be huge, because with regenerative organic agriculture, which involves more than just not not using chemicals. It means using plants that require minimal tillage or no tillage at all. Crop rotation. One of the things we found that I really love is companion planting. If you plant cotton and turmeric together, that helps defeat some of the pests for cotton, and it gives the farmer 2 different crops to sell. So that's really important, is in terms of really cleaning up our act. It's still important because we're, even if we don't use oil in our fabrics, a lot of the mills and the assembly factories that work for us are using coal, or they're using non-renewables. So we're working to partner with our suppliers in order to help them make the changes. The other thing that's critical is to get away from being entirely dependent on selling new clothes. So we're really expanding. If you make durable clothes, people don't wear things forever. They change their weight, or they don't like red anymore. They don't like blue. And so we're building up the worn wear platform. And the other thing I think that's really critical is that we're building a business based on our values and based on our relationship to the customer. So the films we make, the books we publish become more important. Programs like Action Works that actually connect grassroots environmental organizations with customers who are interested in a particular environmental justice, or they're interested in forestry, or they're interested in regenerative agriculture. They can team up with a local organization in their area as a volunteer to give money, etc. So I think that this changing relationship to the customer, which is a very different kind of capitalism than has ever been practiced, will be more critical to us over the next 50 years. But I can't tell you what it's going to look like, but I can tell you that these are the directions. The interesting thing for me, by the way, Ken, and so now I've been working for 50 years.
Wow.
So it doesn't seem like that long a time to me.
Wow. I've been working for 40, so
yeah.
I'm closing in on wow.
Yeah, when you break it down, 50 is not an abstraction, and it takes. And one of the interesting things for me is because I've been pretty much with one company that whole time. I mean, I've had a few little forays outside, but basically, Patagonia has been my home and kind of the organization I've studied the most. And what really comes home to me is this sense that whatever we're doing today is building the company of tomorrow, both for good and bad. And it's what you do every day at work is so critical to developing something that can be really a bright spot for human beings and the planet, or something that's quite ordinary.
I'm going to, if it's okay with you, I'm going to plagiarize that.
Oh, that's fine.
That's an excellent quote. A quick question. When you said it'll take a couple of seasons to get away from virgin oil in the plastics or whatever, or virgin plastic, a season being a year.
Well, I'm sorry. It's for the outdoor industry, a season is a half a year.
Okay.
And what we're going after are the stragglers. The great majority of products are already 100% recycled, but it's the 80-20 rule applies. We're going after the ones that are the most difficult. What we didn't want to do is lose performance, and that was the inhibitor before. 15 years ago, we couldn't go above 40% recycled in polyester without losing performance. But now we can go 100%.
Okay, that's interesting. A lot of chemistry going into that.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting. So
So let me ask you, what do you think your bank's going to look like in 50 years?
I was afraid you were going to ask that. we, we, of course, budget every year. We had to put a 3-year plan together for the regulators when we filed the application. But I sat back a couple of months ago and I was thinking, we issued warrants for every shareholder. So everybody that bought stock, for every share they got, they get 2 warrants to buy stock up through June of next year, June 1 of next year. And so I invested $1 million in our initial capitalization. And never in my life did I ever think I'd be at a point where I could write a check with that many zeros, but I did. It was really cool to do. But I started thinking, well, where am I going to get $2 million to exercise my warrants, which are 2 for 1? I don't have the cash. Do I just sell everything and try to turn it into cash? Well, I think the logical thing to do would be to sit back and see where is the company going to be in 10 years. And then that would make a rational decision of whether to go borrow money or sell everything or whatever. So I did a plan for where we could be in 10 years. And it is this is all financial metrics, but it relates back directly to the values proposition because, I mean, quite honestly, the more, it's like you guys, instead of giving 10 million a year away, you can give 100 million. The money matters, especially in impact. And in 10 years, we could be $10 billion in assets. We could be the largest values-based bank in America. I guess maybe Amalgamated could beat us, but certainly one of the top 2 or 3, and one of the top 3 or 4 in North America, with a very, very nice profit profile and therefore the ability to make a lot of impact. I think from a values proposition right now, our most important project is our rooftop solar lending or residential solar lending platform. And we have an amazing chief technology officer who has just spun off the division into a wholly owned subsidiary of our holding company, because we want to be ready to go nationwide with that product as soon as we come out of the regulatory de novo period is what it's called. Yeah. So with that product alone, we can make a huge impact. But the hard part for us is we've joined the Net Zero Banking Alliance, all of that. And at this point, it's a lot of happy talk. And it's I'm not comfortable with it. I'm not comfortable with the fact that, we've made the commitment to be net zero and I want to be real net zero, not just net zero and draw down our greenhouse gas emissions, not just CO2, but all of it. But as a bank, we've got the most difficult scope 3 challenge of almost any business, because of our customers, the thousands and thousands of customers. How do you collect that data? So I think for the next 10 years for us, the business proposition is getting to 10 billion. The values proposition is relatively soon having, knowing where we are in our emissions, but then actually taking all the steps to reduce scope 1, 2, and 3 to the point where we're true net zero. And I mean, if we can't get there in 10 years, then something's bad wrong.
Yeah. It's interesting I think one of the differences between, say, Patagonia and the bank, in Patagonia, we're still in the business of trying to reduce the harm we do. What we do tends to extract more from the earth and give back, except when we're dealing with regenerative organic agriculture, where we're actually building topsoil and sequestering carbon. But what you can do as a banker, you can have a lot of positive impacts, say with the solar program, or with programs like financing community broadband or community solar, looking at what some of the challenges are going to be in the economy and in the and on the planet over the next few years and saying, okay, well, these are activities that are going to help. And this is where we think we can be, and this is where we think we can be helpful, because the great advantage of business as opposed to NGOs or government is we can be self-sustaining, we can be self-supporting. So if you can provide the money people need and at the same time keep enough to keep your bank going and growing, there's a tremendous amount you can do.
Yes, I agree. And finance is a uniquely situated business to be able to make a larger impact. I don't know who it was that coined it. It might have been Vince Siciliano at New Resource Bank, but changing finance to finance change. And that really needs to happen. One other thing that I've been thinking about a lot, Vincent, is political activism. And I seem to always be walking that fine line or walking the edge of the axe of being, too vocal or outspoken and then not enough. And I know that with you guys, you had the advantage of being one family owned. You didn't have shareholders report to. You didn't, nobody really to report to. And Yvonne is very, very outspoken, and I love it. And most of his raving fans probably agree. They love it. And in fact, to the point, one time my brother's a huge Patagonia fan, but he's a very, very right leaning, probably as diametrically opposite of me as anybody could be. And when you guys sued the Trump administration over the Bears Ears monument, my brother sent me a text, and it was really edgy and irritated with Yvonne about doing that. And I said, dude, what are you talking about? You've been buying Patagonia stuff for 30 years. You love it. Yvonne hadn't changed his stripes. He hasn't changed. He's been this politically vocal and outspoken and engaged forever. What are you going to be able to still be unconstrained, going forward?
Yeah. Well, I hope so. I think one of the, we were for 30 years a company that supported activists. And I think in the last 10 years, we've become an activist company. And part of that is because the environmental crisis, which we've been talking about since 1989, has become much more obvious, and action has become much more urgent. The other thing is the polarization, that the fact that there are two major political parties in this country, and one of them is, come on the side of climate denial and opposition to any kind of environmental work. I was reading an interesting article, not very new, but academics from 2014, who made the argument that a lot of climate denial on the right side of the political aisle has to do with fear of what liberals want to propose for dealing with climate change. And that if you start to talk about market-based solutions, or you talk less about government programs, you get a softening of attitude about the reality of climate change, at least. And just as when I mentioned regenerative organic agriculture, I really think that there's a necessity. I guess I'm speaking more for myself than the company, but I think there's a necessity of all around the world bringing together to some extent the urban and the rural economies, so that we no longer have so many people who are disadvantaged. But to get back to the point, I think there are a lot of customers that forgive us our stance. because perhaps your brother is still buying from us because of the quality of the clothes. There was an Axios Harris poll recently that named us, I think, as the second most trusted company in the country.
Jeez.
And we were sixth among Republicans, which we're all really proud of. We're glad that we welcome customers of all stripes, and we're not trying to drive people away, but we're also not softening the positions we take, and we know a lot about this stuff, and we're not going to shut up.
Great. That's kind of the last 4 words are exactly what I was hoping I would hear. But who was the most trusted company? Good Lord, how could anybody be ahead of you guys?
Well, I can't remember, but last year we were number 1, so I can't remember who edged us out. And during the first year of the pandemic, Clorox was the most trusted company. So I wouldn't, I wouldn't put this banner across our website for too long.
Well, that's awesome. I hope that someday that we can be in the top 100 or whatever. It's just bankers are like attorneys or insurance agents. I think we're in the category that people love to hate. Oh, and I probably should say that I do love my brother very much. I'd take a bullet for him. But
and I'm grateful to your brother for turning you on to let my people go surfing. So
exactly.
And for his business.
I keep telling him, look, dude, you're the cause of all this for me. We are at the time for the Q&A, I think now, Lauren, aren't we? Do you want to?
Yeah.
You've been collecting the questions. If you want to go ahead and launch that.
I have quite a few. So one of the first questions we got was from Kathy, and she is curious as to why the decision was made to convert the structure to a purpose trust versus a philanthropic enterprise.
Well, I think that I'd go back to the original statement about a foundation still can't own a company's stock without owning a lot of other things. A foundation can't be dependent on stock from one company. So the purpose trust also, because it specifically addresses the idea of a company being committed to its values. So it's really designed exactly for the intention that we had.
Yeah. The next question I have is for you as well, Vincent. It says, in your 50-year working history, if you could talk about one or more instances when you had a conflict between financial return versus saving the planet, and how did you resolve it? Do you have any other guidance for other triple bottom line organizations? And I'm sure Ken has had instances of this conflict as well. So perhaps you both can share.
Yeah. Thank you. I'd like to keep the answer short, but I think there's sort of 2 answers to it. One, I think it's really important for B Corps and for other values-based businesses to avoid thinking about profit and purpose as being subjects of compromise. I think there's a natural tension, and you have to look at the whole of your business and you say, okay, well, we need to make money here to pay for this activity here. That's legitimate. But for a business, I think it's absolutely essential that your values serve the business model and that the business model serve the values. I think it's very difficult if you set them up as oppositional or even sort of side by side. I know that for Patagonia that we've become much more successful and nimble as a company the more that our values have informed the business model, because those value, the constraints we placed on ourselves actually spurred innovation that led to new business. And when those are aligned, lots of things happen that are good for people and planet, and they're also good for the business. You need an alignment there. You can't have a business model that has nothing to do with the values.
That really summarizes it, Vincent. And Lauren, what I was going to say was instances where they've conflicted or on the surface conflicted. Yes, there's been instances, but probably bigger picture is this is really hard stuff, because you're kind of running a for-profit and nonprofit at the same time, and they do have frequently competing, at least on the surface, competing initiatives. And in our case with Climate First, for instance, Lauren, a good bit of her day is spent making sure that we are doing the right thing, and everything that encompasses, everything that term encompasses. And we had to make the commitment, we're gonna pay somebody, a high level, very skilled person to be worried about that all the time. Yeah. And maybe if you didn't make the commitment, you wouldn't have done that. It's a little bit hurtful or grating when people call me names, which they do frequently, bunny hugger, tree hugger, flaming liberal, whatever. But I know at the end of the day, like you said, Vincent, it really, really drives the profitability and all the financial metrics of a company. And we kind of proved that with First Green. We were in the very top tier of financial performance of all Florida banks, and we were doing good. But with Climate First, it's even less compromise on the doing good part.
I'm going to give your listeners two quotes. And the first from Evo, he's often said it. He says, "Every time I do the right thing, I make money." And then the second one is from Dwight Eisenhower. Says, "Whenever I can't solve a problem, I make it bigger." Because there's something you're not looking at. And I think that's the main, when people talk about a kind of comfortable compromise between profit and purpose, they're not looking at the picture large enough to create a solution that's going to end up doing both.
That's perfect. Both of those are a perfect summation. Laura, do you have any more questions?
I have quite a few more. The next question is from Chandler. He's asking if the Holdfast Collective plans to provide academic scholarships or research grants for individuals in natural science, environmental sustainability, of the like. Did that come through?
Laura, yeah. Well, did you hear that, Vincent?
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that was for you.
I don't know what
it was about. The question was about the Holdfast Collective.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that. I'm sorry. Now you're going to have to repeat the question.
It's okay. It was asking if the Holdfast Collective plans to provide any academic scholarships or research grants for individuals in the environmental space.
I think probably not. I don't know this for certain, but I know that the Chenards and the whole purpose of giving a lot more money away every year is to on the ground work to address climate change. And we've never given money to support conferences or to support research or to support education. I'm not saying those aren't really worthy projects, but that's been kind of outside our wheelhouse.
Okay. Let's see here. I have quite a few. I'm trying to get through them all here. Let's see, where did my number go? There's another question here that says that there's an overriding concern with worldwide population explosion over the next 100 years, obviously resulting in starvation from one group taking over food and fiber. So is there a concern that Patagonia has in that space, and how, if there's a way that you're addressing it?
Well, the interesting thing is we already have the population explosion. I mean, when I started, we were talking about 50 years of the past. When I started working, when Patagonia started, the world population was 4.3 billion. Now it's 7.8. So we know that it's going to level off at 9 to 10 billion by the end of the century. But that doesn't address several existing questions, which is the sheer numbers of people that we have, many of whom are going to be consuming not at the United States level, but say at the European level, is putting an enormous pressure on resources in every country in the world. So, the last time we fed people organically, the population of the planet was 2 to 3 billion, and now it's that many times that. So yes, we are thinking about that. And I think any addressing climate change and also addressing environmental degradation, we have to talk about how we live, and not just industrial restraints, but maybe changing the way we live over time. And we have to face the reality that we're overpopulated on the basis of the resources we have.
Absolutely. My next question is from Gloria Romero Rosas. She's asked if you see activist shareholders playing an increasing role in publicly held companies that accelerates their prioritization of more aggressive sustainability goals, and if you have any pitfalls of this force for change.
Is that a question for both of us, or?
And yeah, I think whoever feels comfortable addressing it.
Ken, you want to?
Well, I think, Gloria, I think absolutely it plays a role, if nothing else. And this is just purely my opinion, and I could be completely wrong. If nothing else, from the perspective of it's PR, right? I mean, every time a BlackRock or whoever comes out and says, well, we're forcing the management of XYZ company to do something, or we're putting a ballot initiative. But I'm kind of afraid that maybe that's all it is at this point, is just, some PR. And when that stuff gets weaponized by the right, which is just, repulsive to me that they're now weaponizing ESG. It makes me even wonder how much more impact activist investors can be. And then one thing I read just the other day that was very shocking, we're always reading about activist investors doing something with oil companies or big oil. And I don't remember who the big four are: Shell, BP, ExxonMobil, and whoever. But Saudi Aramco alone pumps almost as much oil as the four biggest private oil companies. And there are no investors in Saudi, or, there are no activist investors in the petrostate. So how do we influence the Saudis, all the Middle East producers, Venezuela, Russia? It's almost like a too daunting a task to even think about, but I don't want to be too negative. Vincent, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's pressure on companies now to take positions, but it's not just from activist shareholders. It's also from younger employees. It's also from consumer groups. And I think businesses should be careful. We're fine when we're asked to talk about environmental issues, because we have a lot of friends and we have a long history talking about that. If somebody wants to ask us about H1N1 visas and immigration, I almost want to send them to Google or Apple or to somebody who really has an expertise in that. We might have an opinion, but it's no more informed than the person on the street. So I'm a little dubious about companies being asked to respond on any issue. And then on the other hand, what Ken is talking about, it's kind of frightening that this opposition on the right. I think in Florida and Texas, legislatures tried to pass laws to prevent state business from having anything to do with BlackRock because of the positions BlackRock has taken on stakeholder capitalism or against drilling fossil fuels. I'm sorry, it may not be Florida, Texas, and West Virginia.
No, but Florida did. Florida did too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that becomes part of the polarization. And I, I'm an old guy. I'd like to see some of that polarization back down a little bit, and have more conversations that are good faith rather than instrumental to make a point.
I sure wish we could get there sooner than later. One of the things that I most fear is one of my grandkids saying, "Grandpa, what was your generation thinking?" And it's largely my generation that's responsible for that polarization and the destruction to the climate or to the planet. That's for sure. Lauren, it looks like we're about out of time.
Yeah, we just have about a minute left. So I was hoping if you guys could both end maybe with just sharing, like if you were to give this group an action item or a call to action, what would it be?
Oh man, why didn't you tell me you were going to ask this question? My action item would be vote with your pocketbook.
That's a great one.
Yeah, well, I think I'd second that. And voting with your pocketbook actually affects businesses, because businesses respond to that, and then that affects government because government responds to businesses. But I'd also say for those of you who are in business, just kind of the three-part mantra from Daniel Goleman, I think is always useful. Understand what you're doing. A lot of companies don't because supply chains are so deep. Favor improvements, and when you make your improvements, share what you learned. And that's kind of been what Patagonia started with, and I think is useful for anybody who has a conscience and also wants to be in business.
That's a great point. Great.
Absolutely. Yeah, one of our last questions that was just why should one purchase from Patagonia or invest with Climate First Bank? And I think what you both said is an answer to that question, right? Vote with your dollar. Where you bank matters, who you shop with and purchase either camping gear or apparel from matters, where you go grocery shopping, and the brands that you support matters. So I think that's also a great call to action, to look for local B Corps when you're out shopping and choosing services and people. So thank you both so much. Any last thoughts before we close it out for today?
No, thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Vincent.
Always a pleasure.
It was fantastic that you would join us. I really, really appreciate it.
All right. It was great to be here. So,
yes.
Right.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Happy Friday. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Thanks for spending some time with us. And thank you again, Ken and Vincent, for sharing with us today.
Thank you, Lauren.
All right.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.